Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I know this week, each day is referred to as a holy day. So today should really be Holy Monday, they say, in preparation for Good Friday. So I want to wish all of us a pleasant evening. I hope that the day, and in fact the week, has already been very kind to you in a manner that sees you achieving your objectives and being blessed in ways that you never thought you would. You know, these days there is so much uncertainty, there's so much fear, there's so much wrong going on around the world. It's amazing. Those of us who are alive at this time, some would say it's an exciting time to be alive. And there are Christians who believe that more than ever, we are entering the so-called last days. Because never in the history of the world has the world witnessed so much upside downness, so to speak, for the coin the term. Never before has there been so many complex issues demanding the attention, demanding the intervention of mankind on a world scale. And so one wonders, how will it end? Because it has to end. In one way or another, brothers and sisters, it has to end. It will end either in a continuation of the same, plus a chance, plus la même chose, or it will end in an improvement in the status quo, and man begins to treat his fellow men better, more humanely, more sensibly, or it gets worse. And we see even more instances of man's inhumanity to man, of the exploitation of man by man, of man visiting injustice upon his fellow men, of violence and aggression. One way or another, it has to end. And of course, there are those who believe that the end is closer than we think. I remember my grandmother used to always remind us that what hasn't happened and what does not happen in 1,000 years can happen in a day. And the Bible speaks to that possibility as well, where we are advised, we are warned that things can turn around in very quick time. And I know Sugar Bowl likes to end his episodes on radio by saying, your life can change in a minute. And that is so. Not only can one expire from being apparently healthy and strong, alive and vivacious 1 minute, and the very next he has gone to the great beyond. Not only that, but one's circumstances, one's lot, one's possessions, one's plans and expectations, they can change so fundamentally, so quickly. We refer to that as peripeteia in English literature. This evening, however, for the next 45 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you some ideas with respect to education. The state of education, if you wish, in St. Kitts. I want to focus on some areas where I think there needs to be immediate attention, serious systemic change, fundamental alterations in the way things are managed. And I thought that the new Minister of Education would have begun work in that direction, but to my dismay, nothing at all was so. In fact, I don't mind saying it. From my observation, from my vantage point, I'm not actively involved in the ministry anymore, having voluntarily demitted that office few years ago, but I have not seen anything that warrants my support of new developments in education. I don't see anything positive or constructive taking place in education, neither with respect to the physical facility that was promised, nor indeed to the construct and the content of what is taught. So that the intent, the content, the process, and the product of education, in my mind, are all crying out for serious attention, crying out for reform. I believe that what's happening in schools now, to tell the truth, our formal education system in the primary and secondary schools is merely an exercise in sterility. I believe an exercise in sterility tantamount to an exercise in futility. I believe we're going around in circles. We're having a form of education, but we are denying the substance thereof. In other words, it's more formality than substance, more thought than mobby, with respect to what's happening in education. I think we are promoting and praising mediocrity and substituting it for excellence. We like to point, for example, to so-called instances of growth, instances of upward movement, and we point to them as examples of upward, forward, onward movement in education. But when we delve beyond the perfunctory, when we go past the superficial, we realize that things are not what they seem. And from the very center, things seem to be falling apart. Dr. Ralph Gonsalves used to talk about centripetal and centrifugal forces moving out from concentric circles and enveloping us, as it were. But in my mind, they are suffocating us. So here are some ideas which I think the new minister, well, he no longer knew, that the Ministry of Education needs to consider. And these are not, some of these are not new. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, the Ministry of Education needs to end with expeditious immediacy the silly practice of automatic promotion, otherwise called social promotion. It's a situation in which a child moves from one grade to another simply because he has already spent a year or two maximally in that grade, so it's time for him to move on. Particularly from primary to secondary school. Now the folly of this, to me, is so clear that even the blind could see. Why are you going to move a child up from one grade to another based purely on age? How could that make sense? What educational theory or which educational theorist has presented a platform that supports that behavior? That because a child is 12 or 13, he must move on from primary to secondary school. Because a child is 6 or 7, he or she must no longer remain in kindergarten. I mean, what is that? I thought that education was supposed to be a process in which students are taught not just to grasp the essence, but to demonstrate mastery. Not only for its own sake, but because it lends strength to the education system, to the teaching learning process. It gives meaning to the whole exercise in formal education as an institution. So I have argued before, I've written about it, I've spoken about it, I've argued about it. A child should remain in a particular grade. I don't care how old he or she is, until he is ready. He has shown readiness, academic readiness, to move on to the next grade. He has demonstrated mastery of the concept at the low level, such that he is now able to assimilate and accommodate the new concepts of the higher level. That sounds like basic common sense to me. A child doesn't move from grade 1 to grade 2 or from grade 4 to grade 5, except he has shown that he properly understands with a sufficiency of mastery that which is taught in grade 4 before he can move on to grade 5. So how is he going to move on to grade 5? Or to grade 3 from grade 2? Or to first form from grade 6? If he is clearly, and this is the case, these students are demonstrably unprepared academically, intellectually, for that next grade. This child has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is still reading, understanding, writing, learning at a level below that particular grade average. The thing is, the average has been reduced so drastically in recent times that we wonder if we should deal with averages. The point is, though, if a child at grade 5, and forget his age, but he has shown again and again from beginning of the school year until the end, via the various forms of testing and evaluation, by his oral and written products that which he produces orally and in writing, by his behavior, his mannerisms, the way he deports himself, the way he comports himself, that he is not ready for grade 5. If there are 10 concepts that were to have been taught in grade 5 and he has not shown mastery of one, not of half, ladies and gentlemen, the child has not shown that he has understood or fully grasped that which was any of the 10 items, units that were taught at the end of his year in grade 5 or grade 4, whichever grade. Why do we move him on? Because if he cannot handle excuse me, that which was taught in grade 5, how on earth is he going to handle that which was taught in grade 6, which is supposed to build on what was taught in grade 5, which is supposed to be of a higher level, a higher grade, a higher tier than that was taught in the previous grade. So how is he going to handle that? It's like the person who says, I can't afford to pay my rent this month. I mean, it's too much money, so I'm going to wait till next month. But if you can't afford to pay $500 this month, how are you going to pay $1,000 next month? And if you don't pay next month, you couldn't pay $500. You had even more difficulty paying $10. How are you going to pay $1,500 when you refuse to pay for the second month as well? Can somebody explain that to me? That is beyond me. Maybe I'm not smart enough. So if your child cannot understand or has not understood that which was taught in grade 4, why are we sending him up to grade 5? And by the way, this can apply to any grade. I'm just calling grades at random. But I'm particularly concerned that what happens from grade 6 to high school. Because our high schools now are largely reservoirs of underachieving and underachieved students. A set of a whole bunch of remedial students in the secondary schools. And you don't believe me? Man, get up and go and check. Too many students in our secondary schools cannot do it now, right? Properly at their grade level. I always have to point out the difference between reading and calling words. Fortunately or unfortunately, some of them might be able to call words. They can say a word and with some effort call it. But in terms of putting those words together, stringing those words together to form sensible sentences, to derive meaning from what they read, all right. Man, I put it to you, more than half of the students in any one of our high schools are not capable of doing that. I put that to the test. I went around and when I was in the system, I went around and I was the moderator for the English language test of standards. I was also responsible for the teaching of English, French, and Spanish in the high schools. And I went around to the schools and I gave the same test, the same reading test, to all the students of a particular grade in each of the schools. And in none of the schools was more than half of the students able to read well. And I'm talking about, in all cases, the so-called higher grades. Because you might have a grade 4-1 and a grade 4-2 and a grade 4-3. The bigger schools, would have 2 and 3 classes of the same grade. Students read poorly. And if you don't read, you can't write. There's a direct correlation between being able to read well and write well. But we promote the students nonetheless. Students go to first form, from grade 6 to grade 7, first form. Far from ready. Look at the results of their tests. When I was the moderator for the English language test of standards, and I go around and I check the results, I mean, the number of students who failed was more. The number was larger than those who did well. But we promoted them. And of course, the research clearly shows that this leads to when a child is placed is promoted to a higher grade where he's expected to perform at an even greater level, and he can't because he couldn't do it at the lower level. It leads to frustration at the very least of his problems. He becomes marginalized, and he recognizes his weaknesses, so he begins to lose hope. He makes no effort, and of course, very often, effort is just as important as ability in the field of education. He does not achieve. And what the schools present is fake success, because they give certain tests, and if they do mark them correctly, they're designed such that the child can get 100% or 90-something%. Work that is way below what the child should be doing at his grade level. So in other words, you give a child in grade 4 a test, which really should be in kindergarten, grade 1 or grade 2 at the highest. But because you know the child can't perform at grade 4 level, you give him a grade 1 or grade 2 test, he passes it, quote unquote, and you use that to show that the child is learning, quote unquote. And the parents believe that. Oh, my child bright, see? He came first. He get 90%. But give him that which is supposed to be expected of the typical average grade 4 child in the Caribbean all around the world. Because they're basically they're the same age. Give and take a year or two. Alright? And of course, we have to lump ages by cohorts. In other words, 5 and under, 6 to 10, 11 to, and so on. So I want to recommend that we cease and desist right away, starting now. At the beginning of this, at the end of this school year, and the beginning of the next, in September, stop promoting students simply because those students have arrived at a certain age. In some jurisdictions, the child stays in primary school until he reaches the school leaving age, which is set by law. So if he's 16 years old, the child stays in primary school until he's 16 years old. Because he has not shown that he's able, he's academically, mentally, psychologically, even psychosocially ready to take on high school work. So if he gets too old, quote unquote, to be in the primary school, he's sent to a special school, not to the regular high school. Because then he's placed in a remedial stream. And what we're doing in St. Kitts is packing our secondary school with too many students who are at the remedial level. And I recommend you put it to the test. If the minister or the officers in the Ministry of Education don't believe me, let them go and put it to the test. Don't just curse and decry and vituperate, but put it to the test. Say, let me show that this guy is wrong. Even though he spent a lot of years dedicating himself to this very matter of education. Construct a passage which most students at age 5 or 10 or 15 should be able to read without difficulty, and take it to all of the students and have them read it for you one by one. And get a neutral party, of course, to eliminate bias as much as possible. One would argue that to be biased is to be human is to be biased. But to reduce that probability to its barest minimum, get a neutral party. Even if you have to get someone else, someone from the OERU, someone from CXC, someone from the OECS secretariat, from one of the universities, to come in and help you with the assessment. I believe that is one practice which we insist on engaging in the St. Kitts, which is detrimental to the students and their potential and their right to a proper education, the potential for success. I really believe that we need to work on that right away. We have to stop this practice. And teachers know it, principals know it. We have to stop promoting a child simply because he's 12 or 13. Or because he has already spent an extra year in grade 4. He normally supposed to spend 1 year, he's already spent 2, so time to move him up. No, don't move up the child. And parents should begin to insist on this, you know. I think that's one of the problems too. The parents want to know that their child is moving up. Parents should begin. I wish we had a strong teachers union, a strong national PTA, a strong student council association, which will insist that this nonsensical practice, which is inimical to the interests of education, we stop. We will promote a child automatically simply because he has arrived at a certain age, he or she. Disenchantment is what follows, ladies and gentlemen. I want to also recommend that the criteria for promotion, as well as the criteria for repeating students in the system, be systematized. In other words, it becomes systemic, uniformalized, becomes uniform. All schools have the same criteria. This is what dictates whether a student is promoted or that he repeats, or demoted. Students are not demoted anymore. When last heard of a child being demoted? The worst that happens is that a child is asked to repeat a form. He's never demoted. And there are so many instances of a child in grade 4 who really should be sent back to grade 2 to repeat grade 2. Because even if you keep him in grade 4, you're still teaching him grade 4 at grade 4 level. So you keep him there for 5 years, and he was never able to he should not have been in grade 4 in the first place. So you keep him there for 100 years, he's never able to capitalize on the extra time he spent in that form, in that grade. The foundation was weak, so he needs to go back to that foundational era, kindergarten or grade 1 or grade 2, and let him rebuild his foundation there. Then when he satisfies the criteria for promotion, he moves up to grade 3. And if he's really smart, and that's something I don't know if that happens enough in St. Kitts, that happened to me when I was in boys' school. If he's really smart, you have him skip a grade. If the child is clearly an idiot savant, if you want, he's clearly a gifted student, why move him from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3 when the child can move from grade 1 to grade 3, from grade 2 to grade 4? He can skip a grade because he has shown that, and you put him to the test to give him relevant assessment tests, evaluation exercises, and he shows that he's more than capable. He's wise, he's smart beyond his years, as we say. Promote the child, accelerated promotion. It shouldn't just happen just in the police force where you move from constable to sergeant or from corporal to inspector. And in other areas, people are given accelerated promotion. It should happen in schools too. Because we do have those very smart students, way above average, whose IQ approximates that of a multi-genius. And he too is frustrated because the work is boring and monotonous. It's a piece of cake for him. You know, the way I learned French, where several teachers, almost every teacher who I had told me I had a gift to learn it. I did so well, so easily. I was able to speak it with such fluency, without much difficulty, with such grace. So that's a gift to have. For French, in particular, more so than Spanish. So it was not a surprise that I got a grade A in French at GCE, O-level, A-level. So for students who are that good, promote them quickly. But do not automatically promote those who are not ready for promotion. So we need to set the criteria for promotion and for repeating and make it applicable in all schools. Because all students, eventually when they get to 5th form, write the same exam at CHC. The same exam. Students at Sadler Secondary don't write a different exam from those at Sandy Point High. Students at Bassey High don't write a different exam from those at Bassey, Washington Article High. All of them are negative reform. Private and public schools write the same exam. So uniformalize this thing, if you wish. To use that word, that is. In some schools, you pass 2 subjects, you're promoted. In some schools, you have to pass 4. And in some schools, the pass mark is 55%. In other schools, it's 50 or 60. That should not be. It should be one standard throughout the entire school system. So that one student can, when necessary, move from one school to another smoothly and easily. You know how to place him, where to put him, because the standards are the same. Because eventually, all of them are going to write same O-level and A-level subjects. The school system also needs to look carefully at how so-called alternative or optional subjects are offered. A lot of students become frustrated. They can't pursue their career goals because the subject that they need, not just wish, but that they needed to have in order to enter that particular career upon leaving school, they're not able to do it because of how the subjects are configured. You can't have French as well as chemistry, or you can't do history at the same time you're doing geography or chemistry. I think that needs to be some really serious attention needs to be paid to that, because some children know what they want to do from early o'clock, with or without guidance from their parents or teachers. They know what they want to do from early o'clock. They've seen John Brown or Mary Jane do this and excel and do well. They like what they see happening in this particular profession. They like how nurses behave. They like the fact that they help to keep people alive and make them comfortable when they're sick. They like how accountants operate, how they can manage the books and deal with figures. They like how police officers maintain the peace and keep the country safe. Different things. They want to be a botanist. They want to be an artist. They want to be a musician. The subjects must be so arranged as to facilitate the students pursuing the subjects that are requisite for them to be qualified to enter that field and to excel in that field. Not where students have to do this because they can't do that. They want to do A, but they can't do A, so they have to do B. And they might really not in B. They might even prefer C to B, but the school only offers B, the way the optional subjects are configured. And I like to make this point. People find it controversial. Some say it's almost inane, but I don't see why math has to be a compulsory subject from beginning to end. I believe what should be taught, and I'm going to say it again here, what should be taught are what we call the basic essential concepts in math. Everybody must know to compute, of course, to add and subtract and divide and multiply. Everybody must know how to work out interest, because at some point you're going to have to go and borrow money, and money is not ever lent interest free. In 99% of the times they have to pay interest. So people must know interest. They must know how you earn interest and how you pay interest. People must know what percentages. When you go to shop, when you go to do your business, and you talk about 20% and 45%, and you have to pay this amount of VAT, and you have to pay this amount of duty. So to me, those are the kind of things that have to be taught. Why oblige a child to have to study calculus and algebra or simultaneous equations and matrices and vectors and sine and cosine? Why force all children to go through that, when in most cases those concepts in maths have nothing to do with their career? It is not critical for them to understand those concepts in order for them to be successful in their career. And there are many careers like that. Like I said, one can hardly point to any career where basic knowledge of foundational principles in math is not required, of course. You must do that. But I don't see why those advanced concepts in maths, every child must be is obliged to face them, because math is compulsory when the career choices, the career path that that child wishes to embark upon does not require, will never require, if you wish, that advanced knowledge or knowledge of those advanced concepts. I think it's unfair. I can see why it's important to learn English, because one must be able to express himself. It's the language in which he lives, in which he operates, with which he must be familiar in order to succeed. Of course, it's always good to know another language, and that comes in handy. Very handy. I'm speaking from experience. Right? Everybody knows that Blake is fluent in French and Spanish, and those have come in extremely handy over the years. I've been able to help myself and help many others. Not only as a simultaneous translator, interpreter, but also meeting people in supermarkets and in shops and stores and in offices who have difficulty concluding a transaction, and I have to intervene and help. You know, both in St. Kitts and abroad. But for the child who wants to who wants to be a seamstress, because she sees money in that, especially because she has new and novel ideas as to how to pursue that career. For the guy who wants to join the defense force, who wants to spend his life, wants to spend his full 25, 30 years as a soldier. For the guy who wants to work as a doctor, you'll have to convince me that knowledge of these high concepts in math and some other subjects are necessary for him to be able to succeed in that area. Because as we very well know, and we must agree, that when we coerce students into having to write these subjects because they're compulsory, and they have difficulty doing the alternative subjects that they want, they have problems choosing options that fit into their schedule, into their plan. But very often, far more often than not, when we force them into this narrow vein, after they've passed the exam or after they've written it, they forget about it totally. They don't ever refer to it again. So when a child has to factorize in math, and you know, he has to go to that, he learns factorization and he goes to write the exam, and whether he passes it or fails it, he will never ever, for as long as he lives, with 70 or 80, have anything to do with factorization again. But as long as he lives, he's going to have to speak English. And standard English too. Because St. Kitts does not exist in a vacuum. St. Kitts is not an island by itself. And he himself, chances are, going to want to or have to travel at some point. And we very well know that a lot of what we speak as colloquial dialect is not understood in any other place but St. Kitts. I mean, who else in the Caribbean understands? It's Motherwalk with me and you. Or Agid. Or Mia and Pete. Or even, why be that? Why be that? So they need to understand standard English. They need to be able to read and write standard English. So-called Queen's English, if you wish. Okay? So we can understand why that's important. The need for English to be taught from beginning to end. Of course, I have a problem with so many teachers of English, not just teachers, but teachers of English using the most horrible type of language. Broken English, rotten English. No subject-verb agreement, no proper construct, no standard English. Just horrible English. As in the teacher telling students who was overheard telling students, "Ah, you mustn't say are you. Ah, you must say you all. Ah, you sound so stupid saying are you. Ah, stop saying are you. Ah, you hear me? Stop saying are you. Y'all must say you must say you all from now on." You know, so many teachers continually use wrong prepositions, wrong pronouns, wrong vocabulary. We're talking about their spelling, horrendously atrocious, butcher the language as it were. When I was responsible for schools, and I go to the various schools to supervise and observe teaching, I mean, in a number of cases, I had to call teachers aside and explain that's the wrong word, that is the wrong idea, that's the wrong idiom, and so on, wrong expression. Ask him or her to please go and correct it. Giving students words to spell, to learn to spell, for a spelling test coming up, and the teacher is writing spelling the word wrongly on the board. And never forget, the teacher wrote in big red letters on a student's book, trying to embarrass him as it were. Get a decent book. Well, if you wanted to write, get a decent book. But she wrote, get a decent book. D-E-S-C-E-N-T. Get a decent book. Not decent, D-E-C-N-T. This is what she wanted to write, because the book was had dog ears and a lot of painting up and so on. You know, some children like to paint over their letters and scratch out and so on. That's what she wrote in the child book in big fat red letters. Get a decent book. And then another case, if I may say so quickly, a student at Camp Pride me wrote a test, wrote a paragraph in which she spelled the word facsimile. She used the word facsimile 4 times. Each time the child wrote the word facsimile, which is the longer form of the word fax, and in fax machine, the child spelled it differently. So on each occasion that it was a female, on each occasion that she wrote the word facsimile, she spelled it differently, 4 different spellings. And the teacher marked all 4 correct. Big fat tick each time. So all 4 were correct. And by the way, none of the 4 was spelled correctly. None of the 4 spelling of facsimile was spelled correctly. But the teacher marked them all correct. Things like that. This is why when I was placed in charge of the induction course, pre-service training for teachers, I introduced the idea of them having to write an essay to explain how can they add value to the teaching profession. Why do they want to be teachers? They have to explain that in an essay. Some of them would have just gotten a grade 1 at CXC. And man, the butchery of the language was appalling. Those are the ones who I would insist not be hired. Of course, my superiors would go above me, as they can, and still have them hired. But in so many cases, the expression, the English was so poor, you can't believe they just got a grade 1. And they want to be teachers. And some of these said teachers of English are guilty of the same. I believe that there is a need to regulate preschool education. Some children are exposed to preschool education, some are not. And of course, the content differs widely because some attend public preschools, some attend private preschools. So some children enter the primary school at kindergarten way ahead or way behind. Way ahead of others or way behind others. So some are already at an advantage at kindergarten level. And perhaps that is where the problem begins. Because children really begin to learn from inside the womb. And there's some children who can write and spell and so on at age 2. I recall my nephew being able to recite the books of the Bible at age 2. The books of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. How many mature adult Christians can do that without ever? He was at age 2. We've seen students at age 3 write as though they're almost as though they're in high school. So I believe the only thing we need to do in St. Kitts is to regulate preschool education to try to make it more standardized. Like I said, some children start at age from the time 6 months, a year, some parents keep their children home, especially the parents are unemployed or the mother's unemployed, right up until grade 5 when the child is ready to go to primary school. And the law demands that the child goes to school from age 5 to 15. So that needs to be looked at so that we can have a more even playing field. Perhaps the playing field will never be even because some parents are more endowed intellectually, academically, financially, socially than others. Their socioeconomic background differs. But I believe that as far as possible, that needs to be looked at. And then I want to end with this because, of course, I have just about 5 more minutes. I believe that we need to reset in St. Kitts our vacation dates. I believe that the vacation periods are too long, especially summer and Christmas. I believe that, well, vacations are supposed to be periods for students, not teachers, for students. This is why teachers can be summoned at any point during their vacation and they are bound to turn up because vacation time is really for students. Students need to take a break from what is supposed to be the demands and the tedium at times of constant learning. I don't support that, but this is students. School vacations are for students. And because teachers can't, very well, we can't ask them to go to schools and just sit down all day, students to teach, and sit around in a classroom or walk up and down the campus from 8:30 to 3:30 with nothing to do. They are not students to teach. The teachers also go on holidays. But I believe that even for the students, periods are too long. I don't know if any research has ever been done to find out to what extent our vacations, whether it be Christmas or summer, to what extent are they useful? How do students benefit from them academically? Has any research ever been done? I know in some territories like Japan and some of the other first world countries, students must read a certain number of books, and their vacation periods are much shorter than ours, of course. Right? 3-4 weeks. But they have to read, primary school child might have to read 30 books, and he has to write a book report on each book. High school student might have to read 40 or 50 books during the vacation. So now it's all fun and play and go to the beach. Has any research ever been done in St. Kitts to document the extent to which vacations benefits students? The findings might be interesting. But I believe that 1 month vacation at Christmas time is too long. I think 2 weeks maximum is appropriate. And for the summer, I think 4, maybe 5 weeks maximum is what students should have. I don't see the need for students to be on vacation for 8 weeks during the summer, or even 7 for that matter, and 4 weeks at Christmas time, an entire month. I do not see the need for that. And like I said, bring the evidence to me that it is needed, apart from tradition and custom. Show me where this has demonstrably benefited, tangibly benefited students, academically in particular. I want to see that in order to justify the length of these vacation time. These are some ideas of mine, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have to agree with them. In fact, I'd like to entertain. Again, I say I wish that Central Page Radio could institute a calling program where we can discuss and share and exchange ideas. But these are some of what I would like to share with you tonight. When you meet me in the street, when you see me at any point, you have my telephone number, 669-0984, 669-0984. You can call me and let's have a discussion, either on the phone or we can meet someplace and share these ideas. You might convince me to change my mind on some of these matters, and I welcome that opportunity. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. Of course, I represented the St. Kitts National Men's Council. We will be back with you 2 Mondays from now for another topic. Good night.